All right, let's jump right in. Imagine you found the perfect law for your research. It looks perfect. It says exactly what you need it to say. But are you sure you have the full picture? Today, we're putting on our detective hats because we're going to solve one of the biggest mysteries in legal research, making sure the law you're reading is the complete, up-to-the-minute version. And really, this is the question you have to ask yourself every single time. Because a law isn't some static thing carved in stone. Nope. It's a living document that legislatures are constantly tweaking, updating, and sometimes totally rewriting. So how can you be absolutely positive that the version you're looking at hasn't changed? The stakes here are incredibly high. In any professional setting, citing a law that's out of date isn't just a tiny slip-up, it's a critical error. It can completely undermine your argument or lead to some seriously bad advice. Getting this right isn't just important, it's everything. So here's our game plan for cracking this case. We'll start by asking if a law is even current. Then we'll get into the two different versions of every single law. After that, we'll learn how to follow the paper trail of amendments, check our work with some cool digital tools, and finally, we'll wrap up by looking at why all this detective work really matters. Okay, first things first. To track a law, you have to understand that pretty much every piece of legislation exists in two fundamental forms. And trust me, knowing the difference between these two is the absolute key to everything we're doing today. So, on one hand, you have what's called source law. The easiest way to think about this is like software version 1.0. It's the law exactly as it was written and passed on day one. It's a perfect snapshot of that moment in time, with no patches, no updates, the original, untouched code. And on the other hand, you have consolidated law. Now, if source law is version 1.0, this is the fully patched, up-to-date software you'd actually use today. A consolidated law takes that original text and neatly weaves in all the changes and amendments made over the years. The result? One clean, current, easy-to-read document. This is almost always what you want to work with. This chart here really lays it all out. Source law? That's the historical document, as originally passed. It's found in the annual books called the Statutes of Canada, or SC for short. Consolidated law, that's the current living version, updated with all the changes. You'll find this in the Revised Statutes of Canada, or RSC, and of course, on official government websites. So now that we know about the two types of law, how do we actually find the connections between them? Well, this is where the real detective work begins. We're going to learn the techniques to trace a law's complete history, following the breadcrumbs from the current version all the way back through its changes. To make this all feel a bit more real, we need a case to solve. We're going to use the Federal Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. It's a big, important piece of Canadian law, and we'll be using it to see how this whole investigation works in the real world. Our investigation really boils down to two main steps. First, we're going to look for clues that are actually hidden right inside the law itself, these things called legislative history notes. And second, we'll bring in the big guns, the official government record of all legal changes, the table of public statutes. Okay, step one is all about looking for clues hiding in plain sight. Let's say we're looking at Section 81 of our case study, the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act. Right at the very end of that section, you'll often find these little notes. They're like footnotes that list the exact laws that came along and changed the wording. Something like SC 2024, Chapter 31, for example. This is your first stop, your first big clue. Now, for our second tool, which is the official source of truth, the table of public statutes and responsible ministers is basically the government's master ledger. And this quote says it all. It doesn't just tell you what changed, it tells you exactly when those changes legally took effect. And that is crucial. So this table comes straight from the Department of Justice. So, it's legit. It's an A to Z list of every public act, and it meticulously tracks every single amendment going all the way back to 1985. Plus, it has that super important CIF, or coming into force info. Bottom line, this is the official, authoritative way to check a law's history. So, knowing the manual method is the foundation, right? It's essential. But, let's be honest, modern research moves at the speed of light, and we need tools that can keep up. So, it's time to bring in the modern digital toolkit. The reality today is that we need information, and we need it now. The problem with just using printed books or even some government websites is something called the currency gap. That's the delay between when a law actually changes and when the official tables get updated. Online legal citators were literally invented to close that gap. So what in the world is a citer? Think of it like a super-powered search engine just for law. You take a specific section of a law, like our Section 81 of the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, you plug it in, and bam, you get a full report. It shows you the entire legislative history, every amending act, and, this is the real magic, it also shows you every single court case that has ever discussed that specific section. And we're not talking about some random websites here. These are powerful tools built and maintained by the heavy hitters in the legal information world. These are authoritative sources dedicated to getting the data right. At their core, online citators do one thing incredibly well. They create an instant web of connections. You get the law, its entire history, and every judicial interpretation, all linked together on one screen. It's like having a dashboard that shows you the complete biography of a statute, all in one click. So what's the big takeaway here? Citers give you confidence. They close that currency gap so you can be sure that some bill didn't just quietly amend your law last Tuesday. For 100% accuracy, using a citer is an absolutely essential final step. Okay, so we've covered all the how-tos, but let's just zoom out for a minute and talk about the why. Because this whole process, it's so much more than just a technical research skill. It's really about understanding what law actually is. All right, so let's boil it all down. What do you need to remember? First, always be skeptical. Always ask, is this law current? Second, know that crucial difference between source law and consolidated law. Third, use the official tables to play detective and trace the history. And finally, always verify with an online citer for total accuracy and peace of mind. When you trace the history of the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act, you're not just reading words on a page. You're actually watching our society's ideas about debt and money change over time. You're seeing the law adapt. And what you realize is that law isn't some dusty, static thing. It's alive. It's constantly growing and evolving. And that kind of leaves us with one final big question to chew on. If the laws that shape our world are always in a state of change, getting amended and reinterpreted year after year, can we ever really say that a law is finished? Or is it maybe just always a work in progress?